You're listening to The Adventuring Party, talking about gaming the Irish way. Welcome to The Adventuring Party. I'm still Savage.
I'm Warlord Scar.
I'm Seán.
I'm Graham.
And I'm Owen.
We've got a cinquet? We've got a 5-man.
Quintet?
Full adventuring party.
Quintet.
I knew
it's the classic.
I knew a girl call.
You can go a bit French with this, cinquet.
I sometimes get well, I haven't had my breakfast yet, so I'm feeling a little continental.
I had 3
it's all coffee and
slices of
cigarettes.
Dale pizza.
A cinquet, as the Mandalorian
Breakfast
would say,
of
this is the
champions.
way.
Or what should happen to that ship in the Suez Canal, but,
Suez Canal.
already.
Suez Canal, not very deep. That would still be blocked away.
It would be a problem.
Oh, my God.
We sank it. What happened? Well, it went down a foot, but, that really hasn't fixed the problem.
I'm not sure that joke is going to remain topical unless we air this within the next 2 months. I assume it's just going to be stuck there forever. We're going to dig a new canal around it.
They're just going to dig a new canal, ultimately. That's how it's going to work.
Yeah.
That'll become some sort of barter town.
Yeah.
Stuck on the side.
Oh, that'd be great.
Okay.
I want to go to there.
There's a setting idea for you folks. Episode's done. Bye-bye. Have a great week. Okay, so what we're actually here... So speaking of digging things out of the depths, what we're actually here to discuss today is... Well, it's not a review, okay? Let's get that straight from the start, because not everybody here has first-hand with our topic today, which is the D&D adventure Out of the Abyss.
2015, designed by Green Ronin, published by Wizards of the Coast.
I didn't realise it was Green Ronin's baby.
Oh, a lot of the early 5th Ed adventures were Green Ronin. The D&D writing team would throw them out a story draft, and they would flesh it out with game design and dungeons and whatnot.
Give us something with elves, but the elves are all political.
That sort of stuff.
300 pages later.
Elves are inherently political,
Shane's heard of it. I've run it.
Yeah, just let's get that groundwork. I'm in the middle of playing it.
Yep.
Shane's heard of it. Graham?
Well, I've heard of it because you've told me about it. Apparently it was done by Green Ronin. That's about as much as I know. But I have a long history of playing D&D, and I'm happy to talk at length about things that I know very little about, so I think we should be okay.
Familiar with demons and the Underdark, which is probably enough for you.
Demogorgon specifically.
Oh, that jerk. Yeah, no, I've run Savage Tides. I'm familiar with Demogorgon, and his other head, also Demogorgon.
I've glanced at it, and I have strongly held opinions on 5th Ed, so yeah, sure, let's go.
which brings us to Seán, who's actually finished running it.
Yeah.
And has something to say about it.
Well, got a lot of things to say. I'm going to prefix everything I have to say about this with my players really enjoyed this campaign. They enjoyed the start of it, the middle of it, the end of it. I kind of felt it was lacking to one degree or another for the entire run of it. But my players had a great time, and they were full of excitement and stories when we wrapped last night. Actually, it's only been a few hours since they took on the Demogorgon, and now I'm here to tell you all about it.
I'm curious. Like you said, it took you 3 years to run this game, right?
Yes.
Compare that to Storm King's Thunder.
I wrapped that inside a year. But there's a big but here. So there's some context around this. I ran Storm King's Thunder weekly. That took a year. Out of the Abyss, I ran it monthly for about 2 years, and then I ran it monthly for 2 years and ran it every 2 weeks for the past year. Also, there's a significant pace change in the game about halfway through, so it takes you a lot longer to do the first half of the game than it does to do the back half of the game. Despite that, I still feel I rushed the game in 3 years. I kind of feel like the designers intended this game to last basically forever, to one degree or another. I'll get into that.
Go on ahead, I guess. It sounds like you've got a lot to say.
Yeah, so, okay, so... There's no visiting the Abyss in this one, so the adventure runs level 1 to 15 because Wizards, knowing that the structure of 5th Ed is inherently weak, do not want to put it to the test against 20th level characters because it will crumple like paper.
That's on the design notes in the in leaf, is it?
Yeah, but I mean, it's a design notes in every end leaf of every D&D adventure. The only one that runs to level 20 is hang on,
Waterdeep Dungeon of the Mad Mage.
Dungeon of the Mad Mage, and there are some restrictions on spells going into that one. There's a lot of types of magic that simply do not work in that adventure to kind of rein in wizardly shenanigans.
I'm in the midst of playing that myself, so I'm fairly familiar with that.
I actually plan to run that next because I want a story I want an adventure that doesn't matter to play for a few levels, and that seems like it. But okay, Out of the Abyss. Let me get started. So this adventure is broken kind of neatly into two parts, and the two different parts have a very different feel. Mick would be familiar with the first half of it, where you start as a bunch of prisoners in a drow slave camp, you being the players. You then receive an opportunity to break out, either through a demon attack or some political intrigue amongst the drow who keep the slave camp, or possibly a mix of both. And the party are then lost in the Underdark with no food or direction, and a cadre of weird and wonderful NPCs and no equipment to their name. Which means, as an adventure, the writers have decided that they are going to tackle directly some of the weakest elements of the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition system right off the bat. That is exploration, scavenging for food, crafting, navigation. All of these things that 5th edition as a system does badly are really kind of the core underpinning of the first half of Out of the Abyss. So we're off to an interesting start right from the get-go.
Seeing as you're very familiar with the back half of it, Seán, but Mick only is familiar with the front half, maybe we can get some of Mick's insight onto how that works as a player, because as I said, they're the weaker mechanical elements, but how does that come across as the person on the other end?
So I have to say it's an interesting start, and it's one that will appeal to any player who's ever sort of sat around talking D&D going, I really want a gritty kind of game. I want to really have to earn my stripes. And, even a simple sword is a useful, valuable thing to have. The Out of the Abyss does a really good job of starting you on that, because a lot of people will say, don't start D&D at level 1. But it plays as a virtue here, because everybody has just really got their raw stats and one or two class abilities. And because the way that 5th Ed is structured, you don't get the really kind of class-defining stuff until level 3. And earning those first two levels in Out of the Abyss feels significant, because you are scrambling for everything from food, clothing, basic equipment. A bit of rope is something worth risking someone's life for to get hold of, especially for the prison escape, which, as Seán points out, has a huge kind of list of NPCs. And this is where I feel I would not recommend this for a junior GM to run, because it expects an awful lot of the GM right out of the gate. The characters are... I think we're well past beware spoilers. We're going to talk about the game as it's written. And I've given you my blessing, because I don't remember anything anyway. So I'm very hard for me to be spoiled on anything, as any GM has ever run for me.
So I'd agree with you that this is not a game suitable for new players. But at the same mark, once you pass the halfway mark, it really feels like they're taking off the training wheels. Like they were holding your hand for the first half of the game, and you're like, wait, that was holding my hand? That was hard to run. So about the characters, the players are obviously not the only people in the pit of slaves, and when they escape, they presumably take everyone with them. If not, the gates are open and they can come with if they want. You really need to work together to survive in the unforgiving landscape of the Underdark, where there is no light and you're constantly getting lost in tunnels. They're very interesting characters. There's a heavy sort of Alice in Wonderland / fantasy madness theme pervading all of the characters and stories in this book, and that sort of is apparent right from the first characters introduced in amongst the slaves, that they all appear, well, most of them appear to one degree or another to have some form of madness. Either they think they're something they're not, or they have ideas of grandeur, or they're atypical for members of their species. There's one character strikes me, I remember there is a sort of a fish folk race of the Underdark who are famed for their general loopy demeanor, and they are the one of them who is with your party is one of the more calmer, more reasoned voices.
Is that Sloopadoop?
Sloopadoop, yes, Sloopadoop.
I was going to say, I guess for some reason the mental health budget in Drow slave camps is not terribly high.
Oh no, it's pretty low, pretty bad.
You're working from a low base, yeah. What I would say about the NPCs is that they're a genuinely interesting and eclectic lot. There isn't a dud in them, really. So fair play to the writers. You'll certainly, if you go in there with a basic B adventure, you're going to feel like you should have written a better backstory compared to these guys. And it genuinely hurts when you lose a few of them along the way, as you probably inevitably will do, because they are kind of there to illustrate just how dangerous the Underdark is.
Yeah, it's I've seen a lot of players, a lot of DMs online talk about how they just dispensed with the entire cast in the first session, and I cannot recommend enough keeping them with the players as long as possible and building meaningful relationships. The way I kind of did it as a DM is every downtime, every rest, I would pick one NPC and pick one player character, and I'd have just written notes about like what's on that NPC's mind, like what they think of recent developments, and they would they'd have a brief conversation. So certainly some of those NPCs the players did get to love. There is a gnome with a gambling problem called Jim Jar. Who, from the moment he left the party, they were constantly asking, "Where's Jim Jar? When's he coming back?" It worked really well if you put the effort into building them out. There's also some mysteries inherent in the group. They have some secrets, and there's some carry on and shenanigans that will follow the party around through the Underdark. And I guess I don't. Yeah, no, I'll spoil it. But yeah, there's one of the NPCs is a serial killer, and how I played that throughout their journey. They would just wake up some nights to be less one character who was brutally killed during the night, and they spent all the way to the city of the dwarves trying to figure out who that was.
We didn't rank him out. I'm pretty sure it's Pupido. But you can hold your.
I'll hold my tongue, because you were on the doorstep of discovering who it is. I'd say if you're in the city of the dwarves.
Yeah.
That sounds very much like the BioWare computer game experience, where you're like, here are your 8 NPCs, and finding out about them, befriending them, getting their backstory, all that sort of thing. That's about half the game, So it's kind of cool to see that reflected in a pen and paper.
Yeah, it also kind of harkens back to possible older editions where it would be more normal for a party to have a group of, retainers, bag handlers, and, random animals that they'd found and fed along the way. It was also considered to be a very useful source of additional backup PCs. But unfortunately, I don't think 5th Ed has a lot of rules for playing a Koatoa or a Myconid.
Koatoa goes great with Lemon, so he's also kind of backup food,
Like, as I said, Koatoa, the more reasoned and sensible member of the party. Let me tell you, people were actually gutted when he turned up dead in a ritualistic serial killer killing in my game. But that's just how the dice roll sometimes.
Yeah.
He gave us a very poor initial impression of his race, because we showed up I was like, "Oh, they'll all be as reasonable as Sloopadoop." No, they were not.
They worship a giant lobster. They worship a giant lobster female human hybrid called Blibdibloop. They're mental.
No, the giant lobster is out. Let me tell you, they have a new god, in this adventure, because when you visit their city on the edge of the Dark Lake, you're introduced to.
Oh.
Yeah, and that does really show the hand then of what the adventure's about, because you get the big reveal that a lot of this pervasive madness, a lot of what's upsetting the natives in the Underdark, the region you're in, is in fact the arrival of
Demogorgon, who walks out of the sea like Godzilla and lays waste to all before him.
Awesome.
And yeah, if you're an experienced D&D-er, you're like, oh boy, we're third level.
You spent all the,
so let's segue.
You spent all of Savage Tides killing that guy, Mick. Were you not just like, hey, it's this guy again?
Immune to spoilers. But no, let's kind of segue here, because Demogorgon's a very recognisable name in and outside of D&D. Graham, Demogorgon. Go.
Demogorgon, he is the two-headed demon prince of the abyss. So he's prince of demons, which means he is first amongst a selection of odd equals. He took over from Obox Ox, who was a different type of demon. And interestingly enough, Demogorgon's a Tanahari, but there's older types of demons that were in the abyss before the Tanahari, called the Oberiths, who the Tanahari overthrew. And the Oberiths are the original denizens of the abyss. Some of them are still around, like Dagon. The Tanahari seem to have arisen possibly from humans in some way, shape, or form. So there's kind of a lot of rich mythology there as well. He started off looking kind of goofy looking, I think it was the length of his necks in First Ed, because he's got two heads, and he's got kind of a baboon lizard hybrid. He's got a bunch of tentacles. They're all pretty cool. And he was the baddie in Savage Tides, as well as giving his name to the baddie in Stranger Things. Although it was not really a Demogorgon, it was an extra dimension. It was more like an ethereal stalker in many ways. But that's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
So Demogorgon, he gets defeated at the end of Savage Tide, but I guess we're in 5th Ed now, so that was like 100 years ago. I've lost track of time with regard to D&D. But the likelihood is he wasn't going to be destroyed, because they sort of melt into their planes of the abyss and then they reform. Although I'm not up with my current Torp's peerage. He may no longer be the Prince of Demons, having been overthrown at the end of Savage Tides. So maybe he's trying to get his title back. I'm not too sure.
What he's doing, what he's up to. Well, I don't know how much I want to spoil this on Mick, but I would say he's not here by choice, and also he's not alone. As becomes apparent later on. So the party in between of bits of scavenging and being lost in the wilderness for several days on end. You might be a week lost, and then you will come across a new location and maybe find some interesting things in between. There's a lot of little midi dungeons and encounters sprinkled through that early half of the book that are fun to play out. The players will visit in some order the city of the Duergar, Gauntlgrim. They will visit... sorry, that's not Gauntlgrim. That's somewhere else. Grackelstuck, the city of the Duergar. They'll visit the home of the Myconids in Neverlight Grove. They'll visit the home of the Deep Gnomes in Blingdenstone. And each of those discrete areas has a lot in it. There'll be like some political intrigue with the locals. There'll be some quests to pick up. There'll be a dungeon to explore, and then, at least in each one, when things go south, the players get the hint to pick up their bags and move on. The overarching drive of the plot of this early book is the players are trying to get their characters back to the surface and out of the Underdark, because it's a terrible place. Nobody wants to live there. And turns out finding a way out of the Underdark is hard.
I feel like I should argue that, because I've played a succession of Dark Elf characters, but then as I think about it for more than 2 seconds, all of them have lived on the surface. So I really can't rebut that.
They'll find their way up somehow.
Yeah, all of them have been like, yeah, this place is terrible. Let's go live somewhere else. So I find that hard to argue with.
So throughout those areas, the players start to realise that it's not just the Demogorgon who is stalking them, or not them specifically, but stalking the Underdark, but there are other top tier demons chilling down in the pits as well, as they potentially come face to face with Zuggtmoy, which could go well or bad for them, and see hints that Baphomet and Yinogu are also running around, laying waste to all before them, as you know, as demons are wont to do.
Yeah. Would you say, Seán, that they have come out of the abyss?
Yeah, nice. Yes, that's quite an apt description. So, and it's around once the players have really hit all of these check marks on their tour of the surroundings of the Dark Lake, that's kind of where the first half of the adventure ends, as the DM will eventually throw the players a bone and show them a path to the surface. the other potentially interesting thing that is going on throughout all this time is the slave masters from the drow pit the players burst out of are hot on their heels throughout this entire first half of the adventure. So there's basically between the NPCs, between the being lost in the wilderness, being chased by the drow, and visiting all these wild locations, there's a lot for players, I think, to sink their teeth into in this first 7 chapters of this 17 chapter book.
That's a natural break, obviously, the potential for escape from the Underdark. But before we go there, I'd like to throw to Owen. Owen, any observations and any tips for those who seek to fight demons?
The start hook of this adventure is very strong. People will be very, very excited at the concept of, oh man, I started as a prisoner. Immediately, you're probably going to have to do a little bit of work, because as I recall, there are not a lot of rules for being tired and hungry in D&D. There's fatigue, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to need to cobble something together, or really lean on your players embracing that narrative, rather than going, okay, well, what happens if I don't have anything to eat? Is it bad? What do you do? Do you start stripping away hit points? You start stripping away hit dice, and then the problem is that the players become incredibly unlikely to get into a fight because, hey, they can't regenerate. So you need to find a way to do that. Also, some classes are going to work a lot better than others. Like, do wizards have their spellbook?
So that's I think it's really up to the DM at the start. The possibility is there for the party to retrieve their goods at the start of the adventure. Otherwise, the wizard is going to be crafting a new spellbook on the road, which is going to be a long and painful process.
Whereas Warlock's going to be mostly good to go, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And further to that, I would actually, having played this, I would actually advise any DM to really clamp down on some of the classes they allow in this game, and also even some of the backgrounds. So there's a couple of backgrounds in the base book that, as default, during a long rest, simply find enough food to feed everyone. No checks required. Suddenly, starvation is not a problem. You have a ranger in the party. Suddenly getting lost isn't a problem because the ranger just knows the way. It's a problem with with the design and a lot of the early D&D books, where if a class is good at something, that simply means no checks are performed and success is automatic, which isn't really playing the game. It's more of the game playing itself. Further, Owen was suggesting how to represent exhaustion and hunger. I started leaning into the actual system exhaustion, whereas if a player gets worse at things until they die, and actually the Sea of Gracklstuck kind of brings that to a 4. But as I said before, I had 2 paladins in my party, so once they came into their own, suddenly that was not an issue either, as they were just healing and feeding, and it's if you let players take classes suited for this adventure, all of the teeth are removed from the
part of the problem there, though, is almost all the classes have something that's going to create an exception, because that's how the special abilities work. So unless you are like, well, what do you do? I am a human fighter. What do you do? I am a human rogue, but not that kind of rogue. Like, the nature of the abilities in 5th Ed is that they will allow you to circumvent or have an easier time with stuff. Even if it's just being a sorcerer or a warlock. Well, where's your spellbook? Don't need one. I think it's impossible to completely design around that without playing a different game.
Yeah, my run at it, I'm a Dwarven Gloomstalker Ranger with a background in fighting things that come out of the abyss, so very much easy mode. And you definitely have to, but role-playing it, I'm definitely embracing the idea that we are cold, lost, hungry, and wet, and we don't want to be any of those things. So it is a case of players may feel that they should probably just ignore a couple of things in their character sheet for the first part of this adventure to get the most out of it, to really, to really go for the misery tourism.
Maybe I like the misery. Also, I bet your Koatoa NPC wants to be wet.
Probably. There's plenty of opportunities where we are up to our necks most of the time. So that drags us to that kind of flex point you were talking about, Sean. The point where you're showing the way home, a la most episodes of the D&D cartoon, but for some reason you can't jump into the portal. What do you say to a DM who's got a bunch of players who are like, oh yeah, let's go home? So how do you drag him back in?
Well, so the story is you do go home. You go home and you spend the guts of a year sitting on your laurels. Job well done, everyone. And then some powerful figures in the D&D setting I wasn't familiar with, but fans of Ori Salvatore books might be more familiar with them. Drag you back in and they say, we understand there are demon lords in the Underdark. And your players will say, yes, we saw them. And they'll say to them, good. Would you mind leading a small army down into the Underdark and taking care of that for us, please?
To which I think we reply, can we not lead a big army?
So the first half of the campaign is Alien, and the second half of the campaign is Aliens.
A little bit,
wow.
yes. Yeah.
Excellent, yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Huh. It's a nigger like that. Yeah, so it's not even... I mean, you start off with no army, and you literally have to go around the various different faction leaders. So there's a minor mechanic in D&D 5th Ed factions that rarely gets any play, but every now and then faction leaders will rear their head and say, well, I have these interests, are you going to serve them? And if after a few role-playing and negotiation checks, the players will have between a non-existent and small force to lead back with them into the Underdark. And the game changes pace here somewhat. So it's still broken apart by a period of wandering in the Underdark, followed by a area you've arrived in that you can explore, has politics, political intrigue, and roleplay, and a dungeon. But they're no longer broken apart by 4 to 7 day journeys. They're now broken apart by 30 to 60 day journeys. And whereas the travellers with you in the first part of the adventure all had wild and wacky, wonderful personalities and were very fleshed out and interesting, the party you're journeying with in the second half of the adventure is you have 12 veterans. Give them names and figure out their personalities. You also have 6 scouts. Give them names and figure out their personalities.
We're finished writing. You do it.
Yeah.
Guys, this is really long. We're tired. There's a deadline coming next month. And, frankly, everyone hates crunch. So, there's veteran McVeteran face. There's veteran arm. There's veteran Mountain Dew. And actually, maybe you can just do the rest yourself.
I will say, right, that if you go to a GM, here's 8 veteran soldiers. We've named 6 of them. Make up 2 more to suit your party. That's fine. A GM can do 2 without breaking the bank. But here's 10. Name them all.
Reach for
Jim Butcher and his brother Jerry Butcher.
John Butcher, James Butcher.
Yeah.
Hold the Roman cheat. Primus, Secundus, Tertius, Quintus.
Yeah.
It's a joke from the beginning of the episode.
As we are. I guess if you're stuck, go find your favourite Dirty Dozen or Men on a Mission movie and just nick all the characters from that.
You're going to need a good 20 or so to start off with. After you enlist the help of the Deep Gnomes, you want to add another 12 or 15 to that list. And you will pick up a few weird characters in addition to that. There's some returning cast from the early adventure, depending on how things go and where you visit. If you might pick them up. So there is some scope for playing around, but the other issue is, like I said, these are now much longer journeys. And if you're going to be rolling for random encounters in each one, then that can. So how I did it is I played out the journey from between the first 2 locations. It took several sessions. There was a lot of random encounters. The random encounter tables that come with the book. A DM will notice very quickly are not really up to stuff. There's not enough variety in them, and the challenge in them quickly becomes way too low for most parties, bar the odd level 20 roll where it'll say chuck a demon lord at the party and see them squirm. Really, if a player wants to make this work, if a DM wants to make this work, they need to put a lot of effort into the random encounters, and they need to find a way to make that compelling across many sessions of just not getting lost in the abyss, but making fair headway in a given direction and just running into things every couple of days. What I ended up doing is, after the first one, I just skipped all travel. We just went from point to point to point. And, 40 days have passed, you're now at the next location. The other problem with daily random encounters is, of course, inherent in 5th Ed's design, where if a player is only going to fight one fight that day, they're just going to go all out and everything is trivial. Doesn't matter how tough a bad guy you're throwing at them.
And is there anything in this back half to give the sort of players who love logistics and campaigning, armies on the move stuff, anything to do, or is it all so abstracted as to say either GM makes it up or it doesn't matter?
Oh, it's absolutely, this is on your head to flesh out. If you want logistics, you can do that. But it suggests every so many days you build a outpost, and it gives advice on how long an outpost will take to build, and suggests how many people you need to staff at that outpost. But there's no real reason given for other than you should build outposts for why you might want to. I had my players do it anyway, and just had them staff each one, and like how I did it was I'm like, okay, traveling back between the outposts will take fewer days than traveling out did, or messages and supplies can be gotten, but there's no. Yeah, it's really on the DM's head if they want to bring in any significant logistical interesting elements to this game. The writers and designers don't provide any of that. They seemed more concerned with fleshing out the individual locations in the back half of the book, what happens there, what goes on there, what kind of encounters can be had there, and then and of course there's a 60-day journey between this point and the next, so DM figure it out.
Scar, you're our sort of sandbox GM of note. Anything here that sounds like you might want to dive in for inspiration, or even give it a go as an entire thing?
I'm just thinking of this in terms of, like, I can certainly see why people might think that the front half of this adventure is more engaging than the second half. Because
it is.
Well, yeah. I feel like there's this lack of organization management in 5th Ed that would really... I know there are people out there who dig that kind of thing, who would perfectly happy to hex map up the Underdark tunnels and go, well, we have X resources, so we'll put outposts here, here, and here. This will reduce random encounters in these locations, and we can move these units here and those units there. Like, there is certainly scope for a little sort of mini game of, occupation management as you slowly funnel troops down from Gauntlgrim and into your made up outpost stuff. That certainly sounds like a thing, but it doesn't sound like there's anything to do that in the book. It sounds like the book is just trying to imagine the minimum possibilities for how this should go, but is still very much focused on you need to go to these seven dungeons of dread and find the various MacGuffins. And it's perfectly fine to say, well, you don't bring an army into a dungeon because they'll just get eaten. That's perfectly fine, but like the fiction that they've set up is that there is a alliance of good and Underdark moral greyness that are combined together to take on this existential threat. So it just seems like they've written themselves into some other corner here, because they're trying to have a classic 5th Ed, heroes do the thing adventure, but also they've written, also the alliance of good and grey are. The good and the grey are marching out to take on the hordes of demons. Mm-hmm. So
it doesn't really line up very well, and it's very much on the DM to roll their own.
It strikes me as that there's probably a plethora of add-ons that people have made up on the DM's Guild that you can use to just flesh out this entire system. But
the market that will solve it.
Whole cottage industry.
Okay.
It is honestly the bit that annoys me the most when an RPG, someone's writing an adventure and they don't write the hard part.
Yeah.
Or don't write the orbital part. They're just just the GM will do this for you. You're being paid money to do this. The GM is doing this in their spare time. You could work a little harder.
Maybe you're not being paid a lot of money, though, Maybe you just I'm tired.
the realities of RPG development. I will draw a contrast between this and the other Demogorgon-centric campaign that we mentioned at the top. Savage Tides, where you do arrive at Dinosaur Island, as I vaguely remember it being called, and are given the job of organising the defence of a colony town. Graham, you ran that for us, and Owen, you were in that game as well. That felt like a good place for the players who like to organise stuff to get their teeth in. Was that in the book, or is that sort of something that was...
No, it's in the book, and if I remember correctly, there are also various rules for the various different things. So, in other words, I think there were carpentry checks or whatever it was for building barricades, and they would add a certain amount to certain things. Like, it was quite structured. And actually, in many ways, the trick with that is not just going, please make me a DC 20, carpentry roll, and it will add +2 to this. The bit is actually is weaving that into the narrative in an interesting way. That's your job there. It's not working out the mechanics. It's how to obfuscate the mechanics in many ways. Savage Tides is a pretty good game. It was a lot less lethal than Age of Worms, while also I think being slightly harder than the other one, the one in Cauldron. Owen, help me out. Thank you, yes. But yeah, they definitely had rules for that kind of thing, and then your job was to narratively weave that in. I'm now curious, actually, when you're like the 4 demon lords that Seán mentioned that are knocking around the Underdark, I'm pretty sure are all Tanahari.
Oh, there's more than 4.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if the Oberists have had I
can give you the full list.
No, it's not necessary or wise to list every demon lord in the Abyss over the course of a podcast. But I'm curious now as to whether the Oberists have had an uprising following Demogorgon's overthrow as Prince of Demons and chucked out the Tanahari.
So I could reveal the reason why they're all wandering in the abyss.
Let's keep some mystery for someone who listens to this and still wants to play it.
Yeah, absolutely. So
we're going to have to put a big spoiler warning at the front of this one.
I'll skip the specific reason why these and more demon lords are down here, but it is potentially explained depending on the choices the players make and the places they visit. I will say the Domains of Dread, there's various different chapter bookmark points you arrive at in the back half of the adventure. They are generally fun and interesting. They're very flavorful. There's a lot going on in them. Some of them, a few of them actually don't really have much in the way of encounters. One of them, unless the players cause fights themselves, they won't be doing any combat, and a couple of them have no combat at all. But they're very interesting. There's a lot of scope for role playing. A couple of them are less good. There is one of the penultimate ones, which is a optional showdown with a demon, is extremely flavorful, but how it played out was I would read some box text, I would read some more box text, I would read a bit more box text. We'd roll a random encounter that was woefully under balanced for the players, and they dismissed it with a wave of their hand. We read some more box text, and then the players rolled a couple of dice, and then they had a small optional fight with a demon lord, and it was certainly when reading it as a DM, very rich visualizations, very rich ideas in it, but not a lot of meat for players to chew on.
That's what we call in the business a boxing match.
And what I didn't notice about that is it made the finale stand out much more to my players. So the finale also doesn't have a lot of playing. It's mainly players watching demons beat each other up until they're ready for the showdown with the Demogorgon himself. But the book recommended that I severely weaken the Demogorgon from its entry in the book, cut its health in half, take away all of its dailies and single use abilities, put severe penalties on its 2 rolls. So I didn't do any of that, and the players still beat it without a single casualty, because they're at this point they're level 15 and players are going to do that. But there was still a tenseness there. They felt like they were in danger, though none of them really were, because they're honestly tougher than you think they are. And they did really enjoy that final encounter. So I would say whoever wrote the book really underestimates the damage that a party of 5 PCs.
That's interesting, because at the end of Savage Tides, you have a similar issue where Demogorgon, as written in the Monsters Manual at the time, was a huge threat. But if you did any of the sort of 5 or 6 things in the background you could do before you found them, you reduced his AC and his magic resistance and his unholy words and all that sort of thing, to the point that if you did all of them, he wasn't really that much of a challenge. Now, the corollary to that was if you did none of them, I think he just killed you with unholy word. He was like, he's like Shazam, and everyone's dead.
You have to do something. I restored his HP. I gave him back his single use of Feeble Mind, which he used to great effect against the main damage dealer in the party. They really enjoyed that final encounter. And once they saw the damage he was able to put out and that he was able to stun a couple of them around, they generally were worried that they might not get through it in one piece, but they sailed through it. They were never in any real danger.
Owen, as our resident boss slayer, any thoughts on taking on triple threats?
There's often, Paizo are very fond of that model of fighting a really powerful bad guy. They've reused it multiple times where you basically do the optional stuff to weaken him down to an acceptable level. I remember in Age of Worms, which was very tough up to that point, we did all the optional stuff to weaken Kyus, and we killed Kyus before he got out of his pyramid. Yep. That's the way of these things. It's kind of there more as a tuning thing for less competent parties, though I'm not sure a less competent party would get all the way through Age of Worms before the GM started.
Age of Worms was very hard.
It was very hard at times. Now, John tweaked a couple of things.
I remember the fireballs. Yep.
But I remember the fireballs too. But I remember that fight against Demogorgon and kind of going, "I got this guy," and I indeed had him. I had him by the short and curlies by that stage. But I was playing a druid wizard combo at that point. So I had 9th level druids. I had 9th level druid spells. I had 7th level wizard spells. And there were 2 of me, so I was acceptably buffed hard enough to kill pretty much anything at that point. So yeah, that's the way of 3.5 certainly. It took me a while to find the feat that let me get into qualify for my prestige class a bit early, but other than that, of course, not too hard.
Of course, the way of 5th ed is action economy is king, and the side with the more actions is always going to win. So 5 players versus 1 Demogorgon is never
maybe
going to be
he should do what every monarch in the entire world has ever done, and gone. I'm not going to fight you on my own. Here are my bodyguards. I've got 5 Betas and a Marilith. What do they do? They're going to fight you at the same time because I'm not mad.
Of course. And that brings me quickly to advice. So, as I said, I unnerfed the Demogorgon for the final encounter, and the players did feel in danger. One of them got feeble-minded, but they weren't in that much trouble. The game also gives some advice on, hey, you've got a whole army with you. Maybe once around, one of them can take a hit for you, or patch some healing salve on your back. But if really, my players are not the kind of people who Owen gets at his table. Broadly, they are not. They don't put that much effort into builds or tactics, and they still had a fairly easy time against. As I said, they felt like they were in trouble, but they weren't. If you are playing with a table of gamers, you're going to want to beef up this fight so much. You're going to want to put more into it, because even CR26 Demogorgon on his own is not enough for players who've put a bit of effort into buffing their damage output.
There feels like there should be a bit more of the, well, now that Demogorgon has bested all of his rivals, he can summon forth the legions of hell infinitely, and you would have a system where all those troops that you've been gathering all across the Underdark and all across the surface world had to hold back the infinite tides of doom. But I suspect again that that's a subsystem that 5th Ed doesn't have natively, so it wasn't really fleshed out.
The finale feels much more Godzilla King of Monsters, where with Ken Watanabe standing looking on at the chaos.
Let them fight. Sorry.
What an amazing movie. The real villain was the wife for me. Myself and my wife watched the movie not so long ago, and we just looked at each other, ignored the monsters, but someone has to punch that woman. she's awful.
It is all her fault.
It
is all
All
her
I can
fault.
think of now is Demogorgon fighting King Kong. It's like, what do you do? I've got 2 heads, I'm a demon prince, I've got these tentacles that cause your skin to slough off, I can cast Feeble Mind, Hold Person, and Charm. What about you? Is monkey.
Got an axe now. When we were describing Demogorgon earlier, it's like, if King Kong and Godzilla had not fought, but had effed. That's how you get
Do you want
Demogorgon.
Demogorgons? That's how you get Demogorgons.
All right. We may have overstepped several marks just then, but that's probably as good a place as any to draw some conclusion. Seán, what would you say to people who are looking at Out of the Abyss as players or GMs and thinking about giving it a go?
As players, really get into it. Live that lost with no supplies lifestyle. GMs, you're going to need to put a lot of work into this to make it work. But even with minimal work, if you emphasize the NPCs and the environments, players will find it memorable. Even if some of the travel sections and a lot of the fights are lackluster, cannot count the amount of fights that were over in a single round. You really need to put in your hours if you want this to be a tough campaign, but it will be a memorable one regardless.
I would say for that thing, like I'm in a particularly tough campaign of my own right now, and I feel like the GM's secret weapon in that campaign has very much been grinding down resources, not letting people rest easily, not having make us choose between, getting all our spells back or, all our allies dying. So if you really want to play up the gritty element of that, you're going to need to, really hammer on the PCs. You're going to have to be a bit unfair. And, you may need to adjust the rules a bit to get the effect you want. As I say,
bring in the option rules. Change the rest details. Change how easy it is for players to catch their breath. Highly recommended.
Owen, any thoughts before we wrap up?
Whenever you're fighting a Godzilla as a bunch of apes, you must remember apes together strong. So yes, action economy wins.
How can I follow apes together strong? I would almost play it just to find out if I'm right about the Oberiths and the Tanahari. I want to know more about the politics of the Abyss. And I think
you're going to be disappointed.
Gee, that was quick. I was like, mystery. Something to yearn for, to look forward to in this time of pandemic where there is no looking forward to anything. Dare a man to dream? No. Okay, fair enough. Well, that's me done. Yep. All right. Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. Let's go.
I would say that the book is a rich source of illustrations of the locales, the Underdark. So it's not just wet, grimy caves. There's lots of beautiful places and weird places to see down there. So if you're looking for some inspiration for Underdark locales, it's worth dipping into just to get an idea of. It
does just sound like it's a very inspiring game, and that has value in itself, even if it doesn't sort of back up that inspiration with actual results.
It's also a mini source book on the cities of Grackelstuck and Menzoberranzan, so if you're looking for some political...
I do like me a bit of Menzoberranzan.
Oh, so much political. Yeah. Okay, folks, this has been our not a review of Out of the Abyss. We've been the Adventuring Party. You can find us on Discord, social media, etc. We'd love to hear your thoughts. If you want to hear us cover some other published adventures as not reviews, feel free to drop us a line. But until then, and until we all gather again next time to delve the abyss or escape from it, this party's over. Thank you for listening to the Adventuring Party. If you'd like to leave us a voicemail, you can head on over to SpeakPipe and drop us a line. Or you can join us on our Discord server, where we keep the party going after hours. Otherwise, you can find us on Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or Twitter, or you can email the hosts at party@theadventuringparty.net. The Adventuring Party is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike version 3 license. but you probably knew that already. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and look forward to seeing you back here next week. Goodbye.